All right. So this hand I played at Okada Casino. We were playing 50, 100, no limit hold'em, denominated in pesos, and the action started off with a straddle, and then there were several limpers to me in the small blind with jacks. So pretty clear cut spot to raise, and I opted for reasonable sizing given how much is in the pot already. One rule of thumb, three times the big blind plus an additional one for every limper. So that would be here 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1,500 would be a pot size raise. I went a little higher, and that's fine. Happy to take it down. And if somebody calls, play a big pot. There's only three possible combinations of hands that beat me. Not too worried about it. So then I face all in three bet. Everyone else folded, and the decision is on me. So the first thing you have to do in this situation is just look at your pot odds. I put an 18, so my opponent has to put an 18 to match that 36, plus another 1,000, 900 actually, so 45. So there's 4,500 extra, and then it's 8,200 to stack off. So roughly 1.5 to 1, which means my required equity to make a profitable call is 40% equity. So I made an error here in my reasoning. One of the things, actually, the main thing that motivated me to call, because I was sort of undecided. I was thinking through the situation, and I thought my opponent might make a smaller raise with aces or kings, and that's not really reasonable for a couple reasons. So first of all, okay, who is my opponent? And I've actually got a reasonable amount of history with this particular opponent. He's basically a tighter player, knit. I want to say passive, but certainly a tight regular winning player. And usually at low stakes live games, like the tighter regs, they just always have the goods. That's their style of play. So like this type of player absolutely would three bet jam with aces or kings. Um, and it's completely reasonable to do so. Like it might be a mistake to raise smaller with aces or kings. Um, at the time, I was thinking that if he had like ace king, he would do that, and then if he had aces or kings, maybe he would raise smaller, which is sort of like a reasonable thought process in a different situation, uh, where you're a lot deeper or where there's a lot more money still to be bet relative to how much I've put in. Like if he were to make a pot sized three bet, um, it would be to 6,000, and at that point, with only 4K behind, it's effectively the same thing as going all in anyway. So there's not much practical difference between three betting to like 6K and three betting all in. Um, there is a difference, I guess, like making a small four bet, three bet, three bet, because it was straddled. So three bet to 4K maybe because at that point you still have almost one SPR, but if you made like a pot size three bet, then there'd be so much money, little left after the flop. It's all just going in anyway, so it's not much practical difference. But also, um, this player type isn't necessarily going to be trying to maximize EV. They're happy to just take it down with aces. They don't necessarily want to get it in. with aces, like they're happy to just take it down. They definitely don't want to give you the possibility to outflop them. So you have to really understand your opponent's mindset and not attribute a thought process to them that would be a reasonable thought process, but they wouldn't have. Um, okay, so back to the hand. I do stack off, and I run into kings. And I don't think this is just a cooler situation. I mean, it is a cooler situation, and yes, we're only really 15 BB effective. Um, so if you give your opponent a range of queen queen plus an ace king, then we don't have the equity to stack off in this situation. And there's just no chance this villain is doing that with tens. He's holding tens all day. These guys are very good at folding medium strength hands. Like that is not their weakness. Okay. And this guy's I don't want to give you the impression that this guy's necessarily just like a super nit. Um but he might be type passive. He might be like type regular, or like a little on the passive side of tight aggressive. Um, but there is no way this particular opponent is showing up with less than queens. Um, and it's not necessarily certain he's putting it in with queens and ace king. I'm not saying he would or wouldn't. I'm just saying it doesn't seem to me like that's a slam dunk. Okay? There's no way he shows up with tens or ace queen. Like those hands would just fold to my large raise, which by the way is always going to be a very strong hand too. So I'm like a real nit as well. And Villain definitely knows that. So that's why I think he might not even get it in with queens, like, or he might call and take a flop, or he might jam with queens and ace king. I'm not saying either way. I'm sort of agnostic about whether those hands. So we take the best case scenario and give him all the combos of queens and ace king, and we don't have the equity. It's actually close, pretty close. So I don't feel too bad now about making the call. But in retrospect, I think it was a mistake. And then this hand actually ends up running out pretty interesting. Well, not interestingly, but anyway, I turn a set. We don't show our cards, okay? Uh, I was already thinking I'm behind when we get the money in, and then so the flop is like queen ten, whatever, and the turn I turn a set. I tell him I turn three jacks. And he's like, oh, he's like disappointed, you can hear it in his voice. And then the river's a king, and I can't really complain about getting re-sucked out on, But he shows his hand. He's like, oh, because he knew I was telling the truth too. He's like, oh, king, and yeah, so I lost. But it was a really good game. I mean, you can see he was straddled and there's limpers and there was one player, just like a total spot, absolute calling station, and he was crushing it for so long. He went up like a great run. Well, I mean, he was up like 100 big or something. It wasn't like anything insane, but a typical result for somebody who was playing call like 90% of the time, or maybe 60 or 70 pre, but just like, very consistently limping in, calling raises, didn't really matter the position or what. And yeah, he was just sun running. I don't know if well, I think he was my read was that he was very loose passive and not bluffing, but you don't know how accurate that is. But he ended up busting, of course, and then rebuying and busting again. Uh, But yeah, the game was super good. It was a frustrating session. Not just this hand, but I was not winning a lot of pots, and I was getting some really really juicy spots. Like there was another very loose recreational player there. I I wasn't sure, how loose he was. Like I thought he was playing a little loose. You don't really know. Then I saw he opened 5-4 offsuit from like MP. It's a small open, but still, you're like, wait a second. Okay, that confirms it. And so one of the hands, there was like a limp, and then that guy went 500, and then the other recreational player, the one who was winning initially, he called the 500. I pick up kings, I make it 2,000. They both call. Okay, this is like a beautiful premium situation. And then an ace comes on the flop, and we check it around, and the turn comes a break, and one of them bets. I think the first guy, the 5-4 off opener, bets like 5,000. I just fold my hand. Uh, okay, so another hand from my left Okada session. This one was at 2550, and it was a very shallow game. Um, very, it was like 8 in the morning, 7 in the morning when this happened. So we've been playing all night, and it was a pretty good game, like very loose passive, but the stack size are very shallow, and basically the thing to do in this game is just like a very tight strategy pre-flop, folding a lot, and then coming in for big raises against the field when you have a premium hand. So there's a bunch of limpers, and I'm in at 300, and we went to the flop. This actually wasn't the exact situation. I think it was 5-way, but close enough. I feel like I made it 250 and it was 5-way or even 6-way. Like it was, I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. This is roughly analogous. This was definitely the flop, King X. And I checked. And actually, the villain in this hand was the same player from the last hand when I had jacks and I ran to his kings in the 50-100 game. Same guy. So tight passive, tight player, winning rank, and you know the bet was definitely 325. I'm pretty sure, but there was like 1,500 in the pot. So I don't know if it was 5-way for 300 or 6 for 250, but I'm pretty sure there was 1,500 in the pot. And anyway, it was such a small bet that I wanted to call. Um, the stack size I actually had I had 5K, I covered the table, right? But Villain did not have very much. So it was like 1,700 effective. Villain only had this 325 and then like another 1,600 back, if I recall correctly. So I called. I mean, I could beat some value, jacks or tens or nines. Uh, but I don't think he's just going to start airballing into so many players. Mass multi-way pot, like that's just not consistent with this guy's mo. Just random spaz bluffing. I don't think, like, I'm not saying he would never bluff, but I don't think he would bluff in like a mass multi-way pot. And on a board like King 4 that is going to hit some calling ranges pretty well, like guys in there with King 10, King X suited, King Jack, King Queen, like those are bread and butter fish calling hands. And then when I check call on a King 4 board, like such a dry board, um, the only hands that make any sort of sense are King X, um, or 4-4 or King 4 or aces or queens or jacks, right? So he bets again, and I just think he's got the king all day, so I end up folding my aces, and he doesn't show. So there's no conclusion to that hand. But I think actually I played it okay. Like I like my thought process. My opponent, he's going to be showing up with. He's always got the goods. He's always showing up with like a really strong hand. He's definitely not afraid to check or miss bets. Like that's not really his mo. Um, and I'd like to confirm that read. Like I'm sort of developing it now. I'd like to confirm that because I play with him, on a regular basis. So I I'm not even certain of it, but it's definitely something I'd like to confirm in future sessions through observation. Okay, so this is another hand for my session. Actually, this hand occurred at City of Dreams, and ignore the blinds here. We were playing actually 25-50 peso game, and effective stack was about 80 big blind. So the action started off. This is accurate 125 call, and I make it 500. Okay, so obviously this is pretty standard. Ace king, very strong hand, and not really the most compelling action. Folds around the villain, and he had only like 4K, 3K or 4K. Like he was not very deep stacked, and he 4-bet to 1,000. And this is actually something I haven't really seen very much of, is tiny 4-betting. So I think it's like actually really good theory, but it's just not something you see. You don't see a lot of 4-betting in general in the loose passive, low stakes live games that I play in, especially because I game select for very soft games where there's a lot of limping, a lot of passive play, not a lot of raising in the first place, ergo, not a lot of 3-betting, ergo, not a lot of 4-betting. Um, and so this tiny 4-bet sizing, um, well, I just got it in because whatever, we were a 60 or 70 big, and I'm ace king, and villain has aces, and in retrospect, maybe it's kind of obvious from the small 4-bet sizing. In the hands of a recreational player, but you do see a lot of mid raises in live poker. Uh, and then, of course, the next street, they're going to go out and bet like pot size or whatever. But but when it comes to raising, just doubling the bet is very common, usually with a strong hand. I mean, raising ranges are usually pretty strong in general uh, for most player types, unless you're dealing with like a very aggressive player, maniacal player. But that's pretty atypical. That's very rare. So I don't think I really made a mistake getting it in with ace king for not very many big blinds. One thing I like is villain's open sizing under the gun to 125. Or 150 is fine too. But some people like will go 6 or 7 bigs in that spot with like a range of very premium, like queens plus something like that. And I think that's just like a bad way to play and suboptimal, not going to make you as much money. Um, so I like villains sort of bait open sizing. I definitely felt very confident, but I was 3-betting my ace king. And I know it's standard to just like 3-bet, 4-bet stack off with ace king, especially 100 big blind or less. Um, and I don't disagree with that, but I think there is a bit of a more nuanced perspective too. I guess the point that I want to make is you don't just have like some default 3-betting, 4-betting, 5-betting strategy and just implement that mindlessly. All decisions at the poker table are made in response to the observations you make and the assumptions you make about your opponent and their ranges and how those ranges are composed. Now, whether I should have called or folded to the 4-bet, that's not really important because I'm never going to be able to play that situation again. Even if I played against the exact same player and the exact same spot came up in terms of the action, we would now have this history behind us. Not to mention, it could be years from now. Everything can be different. So, but what is important is how we determine our 3-betting, 4-betting ranges, how we go about the process of deciding, what hands we're going to re-raise with, what hands we're going to fold in those situations. So Ace King is a very good hand to stack off with, aside from aces or kings. Like, those are hands are great to stack off with, obviously. It's just never really a discussion. Maybe there are some rare spots you can fold kings, very rare, but pretty much you're always good to go with those hands. Regardless, doesn't matter if it's a huge hand. I mean, well, obviously aces, you're good to go against any action, doesn't matter, right? Kings, almost always 99.99% of the time or whatever. But when you get down to ace, king, or queens, now sometimes you have a decision, and sometimes you do want to fold these hands pre-flop in not entirely uncommon situations. Like, you will find these spots on a regular basis if you play a lot of live poker. But ace king is sort of a better candidate than queen queen because of the blocker effect. So now instead of having 6 combos of aces and kings, there's only 3, which is important when you're making, because those hands, well, aces in particular, really cripples you, in terms of equity. But it's important, and so if you have to have like another hand aside from aces and kings, then you want it to be ace king usually, more so than even queens. And ace king also plays better all in than it does taking a flop. You get to see all the cards, and you don't have to play ace high, post flop in a big pot, which is always a choice, a series of bad choices. You got to select the least bad choice. I'm not saying that you should never get in that situation, but usually that's like a bad situation you're dealing with because you could have flopped a pair and it would have been a great situation or something like that. And in fact, it is my contention that ace king is not necessarily an auto 3-bet against certain live raising ranges, specifically for very tight and passive players. You'll do better flatting their raise when you have a number of very loose players still to act that you can invite into the pot. There's no need to necessarily isolate yourself against a very strong range. And I think this is an important point to drive home because it runs contrary to pretty much everything that you're going to read or view in the poker literature, which is all about aggression and playing faster than everybody and being more aggressive. And there's a lot of games where that's the best approach, but that's not going to be your typical 1-2 game. It's not going to be your typical soft, loose passive live game. So if you're playing in these sadly soft, loose live games, you really want your strategy to be optimized for those games. You don't want to be just sort of mimicking what good players do in other games. You have to really understand the zeitgeist of the poker game that you're playing at. And once you do that, your results are going to be a lot better. If you try to force the wrong strategy for a particular game, then you're going to be frustrated and you're not going to know why it's not working. All right, I'm going to end my video there. Thanks so much for tuning in. Let me know if you're enjoying this new format. I'd love to make more of these live poker videos where I discuss live strategy, go over hands from some of my sessions, and maybe take a broader view of live poker, no limit hold'em. I'd love to hear about some hands that you've played in the comments, or if you have any questions or thoughts on my analysis or the hands that I played. Other than that, good luck out there to all you grinders. And if you made it this far in my video, you might want to consider liking, subscribing, checking out some more of my content. Until next time, take care, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in to my channel.